Imagine a single act of kindness that could rewrite your entire life. Poor waitress saves dying billionaire. His reaction changes her life forever. What if a single moment of kindness could change two lives forever? Welcome to Whisper Fable, where ordinary moments turn into extraordinary stories. Rachel wiped down the same sticky table for the third time that evening, her worn sneakers squeaking against the diner's checkered floor. At 35, she'd been serving coffee and pie at Mel's Corner Diner for over a decade, watching the world change through grease-stained windows while her own life stayed stubbornly the same. The late shift meant fewer customers, but every tip mattered when you're raising a 7-year-old daughter alone. That Tuesday night in October, with autumn rain tapping against the glass, Rachel noticed the man in the corner booth. He'd ordered black coffee an hour ago but hadn't touched it. Something about the way he clutched his chest, the pale sheen across his forehead, made her stomach tighten with worry. She'd seen that look before. Her father, right before the heart attack that took him. Here's a question to pull you deeper into this story on Whisper Fable. Where are you watching from tonight? Have you ever had a moment where everything changed in an instant? Rachel had always been good at reading people. 12 years of waiting tables taught you to notice the businessman hiding divorce papers under his newspaper, the elderly woman who ordered soup just for someone to talk to, the trucker counting change twice before ordering. It was a survival skill in a job where your kindness determined whether you could pay rent. The man in booth 7 was different. His suit probably cost more than Rachel made in 6 months, but money couldn't hide the exhaustion carved into his face. David Harrison, though she didn't know his name yet, had driven 3 hours from the city after another 18-hour day managing his technology empire. His doctor's warnings about stress echoed in his mind as he'd pulled off the highway, desperate for somewhere quiet to think. "More coffee, hun." Rachel approached with the pot, noting how his breathing seemed shallow. Just the check, please." His voice was strained, polite, but distant. David had learned to keep walls up. At 42, he'd built a billion-dollar company, but lost his marriage, his health, and most days his sense of purpose along the way. Rachel set down the check and hesitated. Her daughter Lily always said she cared too much about strangers, but Rachel couldn't help herself. "You feeling all right? You look a little pale." David tried to smile, tried to wave her off like he always did, but then the pain hit. Sharp, crushing, radiating down his left arm like lightning. The coffee cup slipped from his fingers, shattering against the floor in a spray of dark liquid and white ceramic. "Sir!" Rachel was beside him instantly as David doubled over, his face gray as a November sky. "Sir, stay with me. What's your name?" "David!" he gasped, one hand pressed against his chest. Can't breathe." Rachel's training from her volunteer work at the fire department kicked in. She'd taken CPR classes after her father died, vowing never to feel that helpless again. "David, look at me. I'm Rachel. You're having chest pains, but you're going to be okay." Her hands shook as she dialed 911, but her voice stayed steady. "I need an ambulance at Mel's Corner Diner on Route 34. Middle-aged man, chest pains, difficulty breathing." She knelt beside David's booth, one hand on his shoulder. "They're coming, David. Just keep breathing with me." The diner had emptied except for old Pete at the counter, who watched with worried eyes. Rachel grabbed a clean towel, dampened it with cool water, and pressed it gently to David's forehead. "Is there someone I should call? Family?" David shook his head weakly. There was no one. His ex-wife had remarried, his parents were gone, and his business partners were competitors more than friends. Here he was, worth more money than small countries, and a stranger was the only person holding his hand as pain tore through his chest. "Just stay," he whispered. "Please." Rachel squeezed his hand tighter. "I'm not going anywhere." In the distance, sirens wailed through the rain, growing louder with each second. David's grip on her hand was the only thing anchoring him to consciousness, and Rachel's steady presence was the only thing keeping his panic at bay. Neither of them knew that this moment would change everything that mattered in both their lives. The paramedics burst through the diner's glass doors like a wave of organized urgency. Rachel stepped back as they surrounded David, but he reached for her hand again, his eyes pleading. "Don't leave," he managed between oxygen mask breaths. "I'll follow in my car," she promised, though she had no idea why. Her shift wasn't over. Her babysitter was only paid until midnight, and this man was a complete stranger. But something in his eyes reminded her of Lily during thunderstorms, afraid and needing someone to stay close. At Mercy General Hospital, Rachel sat in the waiting room, still wearing her coffee-stained uniform, feeling completely out of place among the sterile walls and hushed conversations. She'd called Mrs. Chen next door to watch Lily, explaining she'd be late without really explaining why. What could she say? That she was sitting in a hospital waiting for news about a man she'd known for 2 hours. "Ma'am?" A doctor in green scrubs approached. "Are you here for David Harrison?" Rachel nodded, suddenly nervous. "Is he... He's stable. Massive stress-induced cardiac episode, but we caught it in time. You saved his life by calling when you did." The doctor's smile was tired but genuine. "He's been asking for you." Walking through the cardiac unit felt surreal. David looked smaller in the hospital bed, connected to monitors that beeped steadily, but his eyes were alert, and they lit up when she entered. "You came." His voice was weak but stronger. "I said I would." Rachel pulled a chair close to his bed. "How are you feeling?" "Like I got hit by a truck, but alive." David studied her face, really looked at her for the first time. Kind eyes, worry lines that spoke of too many hard days, hands that had worked for everything they'd earned. "I need to tell you something." Rachel waited, watching him gather courage for whatever he needed to say. "The name on my credit card. Harrison Industries. That's my company. I'm not just David, I'm David Harrison." He watched for recognition, for the change that always came when people realized who he was. But Rachel just looked confused. "Should that mean something to me?" For the first time in years, David laughed, really laughed. Here was someone who'd saved his life without knowing his net worth, without calculating what she might gain. "I run a technology company." "A big one. I'm very wealthy." Rachel's expression shifted then, not to greed or calculation, but to something that made David's heart sink. Distance, caution. The same look Lily got when kids at school bragged about toys she couldn't afford. "Oh," she started to stand. "I should go. I'm sure you have people who should be here instead of—" "No." David's hand caught hers. "Please, there's no one else. And you're here because you chose to be, not because of what I can give you. Do you know how rare that is?" The monitors beeped faster as his emotions spiked. Rachel settled back into her chair, her nurse's instincts overriding her discomfort. "Okay, I'll stay a little longer. If this moment of unexpected connection touched your heart, please give the video a thumbs up on Whisper Fable. Sometimes the most important meetings happen in the most ordinary places." David closed his eyes, still holding her hand, feeling truly safe for the first time in years. But neither of them saw the photographer outside the window, or knew that by morning their story would be front-page news. 3 days later, Rachel's quiet life exploded. The newspaper photo showed her holding David's hand in the hospital with a headline that made her stomach drop. "Billionaire's mystery angel, local waitress, saves tech mogul's life." Her phone hadn't stopped ringing since dawn. "Mom, there are people with cameras outside," Lily whispered, peeking through their apartment's torn curtains. At 7 years old, she didn't understand why strangers wanted to talk to her mother, but she could feel Rachel's anxiety like a heavy blanket over their small home. Rachel had called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years because reporters were camped outside Mel's diner, asking customers about the hero waitress. She felt exposed, vulnerable, like her privacy had been stolen and sold for entertainment. Her phone buzzed again. David, calling for the 4th time that day. "Please, Rachel, just let me explain." "There's nothing to explain." Her voice was tight with exhaustion. "You don't owe me anything. I did what anyone would do. But I want to help. I know about your student loans, your daughter's medical bills from last year." Rachel's blood ran cold. "How do you know about that?" The silence stretched between them, heavy with David's regret. "I had someone look into. I wanted to know how to help properly." "You investigated me?" Rachel's voice cracked. "Like I'm some kind of project?" David sat in his penthouse office, surrounded by luxury that felt meaningless now. He'd handled this all wrong, approaching Rachel's life like a business problem to solve instead of understanding that she was a proud woman who'd never asked for charity. It wasn't like that. I know what you wanted. Rachel wiped tears she refused to let fall. Rich man feels guilty. Throws money at poor waitress. Everyone feels better. That's not fair. David's own pain leaked through. You don't know what it's like. Every friendship, every relationship, everyone wants something. You were different. You didn't even know who I was, and you still... And now I do know. Rachel looked at Lily coloring at their kitchen table, trying to pretend she wasn't listening. I know you're the kind of person who investigates someone instead of just asking, who thinks money solves everything. The call ended in silence. David stared at his phone, feeling more alone than he had in the hospital. He'd spent 42 years building walls to protect himself from people who wanted his money, and now he'd lost the one person who didn't. Rachel sat on her couch, holding Lily close as helicopters circled overhead and reporters knocked on neighbors' doors. She'd grown up poor but proud, raised by parents who believed in earning what you had. David's investigation felt like pity, and pity was something she couldn't accept. Mommy, why are you crying? Lily's small hand touched Rachel's cheek. Just tired, sweetheart. Just tired. Here's another moment to connect with us on Whisper Fable. Have you ever faced something like this? When kindness gets complicated and pride stands in the way of help? Let us know in the comments how you might handle such a situation. But in his office, 50 miles away, David was learning something about himself. For the first time, someone had walked away from his money. And instead of relief, he felt devastated. 2 weeks passed like a slow storm. The media attention faded. When a celebrity scandal took over the headlines, but the damage lingered. Rachel returned to work, enduring sympathetic looks and whispered conversations that stopped when she approached tables. The story had painted her as either a saint or a gold digger, and she hated both versions. David, meanwhile, couldn't focus on board meetings or quarterly reports. His assistant fielded calls from charities wanting donations in honor of his angel, while he stared out his office window, wondering how he'd destroyed the most genuine connection he'd ever made. The turning point came on a Thursday evening. Rachel was closing the diner alone when she found the envelope slipped under the door. No logo, no return address, just her name in careful handwriting. Inside was a handwritten letter and a small photograph. Rachel, it began. I've written this letter 12 times, trying to find words that don't sound like excuses. I was wrong to investigate your life. I was wrong to think money could fix what I broke. But I need you to understand something about that night. I've spent 20 years building a company, making deals, surrounded by people who see dollar signs when they look at me. I was dying that night, not just from the heart attack, but from loneliness I didn't even recognize anymore. When you held my hand, when you stayed because you wanted to, not because you were paid to, it was the first real human connection I'd had in years. I know you don't need saving. You've been saving yourself and your daughter just fine. But maybe we could save each other from being so alone. The photograph was of David at 7 years old, standing next to a woman in a diner uniform. His mother, the letter explained, who'd worked 3 jobs after his father left, who'd taught him that kindness wasn't about what you could afford to give, but what you chose to give from your heart. She would have liked you, the letter concluded. She would have said, you have good hands, hands that help without counting the cost. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking for one more chance to know the person who saw me as just David, not David Harrison. Rachel wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, something shifting in her chest. She thought of her own mother, who'd cleaned office buildings at night to pay for Rachel's nursing school dreams that never quite materialized, who'd taught her that pride was important, but so was recognizing when someone's heart was genuinely sorry. The next morning, Rachel drove to Harrison Industries. The building was all glass and steel, intimidating and cold, but she remembered the vulnerable man in the hospital bed. the fear in his eyes that had nothing to do with wealth and everything to do with being human. David's assistant looked surprised when Rachel gave her name. Minutes later, David appeared in the lobby, hope and terror warring on his face. "I got your letter," Rachel said simply. "And?" Rachel studied his face, the same exhaustion, the same loneliness she'd recognized that first night. "And I think your mother was right about good hands. But next time you want to know something about me, just ask." If you've been enjoying this story and want to see how Rachel and David's connection unfolds, subscribe to Whisper Fable for more heartwarming tales like this one. David's smile was brighter than any corporate success he'd ever achieved. "I have so many questions." "Then let's start with coffee," Rachel said, "but somewhere that serves better coffee than Mel's." 6 months later, Rachel stood in the kitchen of the community center David had quietly helped her open, watching Lily help serve lunch to families who needed it most. The Second Chances Cafe wasn't a charity. It was a partnership. Rachel ran the programs with her degree in social work that she'd finally finished, while David provided funding and business expertise without fanfare or photo opportunities. Their friendship had grown slowly, carefully built on conversations over ordinary dinners and shared stories about childhood dreams and adult disappointments. David learned about Rachel's father's death, her struggles through nursing school, her fierce determination to give Lily a better life. Rachel learned about David's lonely childhood, his mother's death when he was 16, his marriage that failed because success couldn't fill the empty spaces where connection should have been. "Mom, Mr. David's here," Lily called out, racing to the window. She'd taken to David immediately, drawn to his patient answers to her endless questions and his genuine interest in her drawings and school stories. David entered carrying grocery bags, having learned that showing up with food was the best way to be useful without being intrusive. "How many today?" he asked, rolling up his sleeves. 43 families, Rachel said, tying her apron. "And Mrs. Rodriguez is bringing her famous tamales." They worked side by side, serving meals and listening to stories from people rebuilding their lives. David had discovered that wealth felt meaningful only when it touched individual faces, individual hopes. Rachel had learned that kindness could come in many forms, and that accepting help didn't diminish her strength. "You know," David said during a quiet moment, "I never thanked you properly." Rachel looked up from wiping tables. "For what?" "For saving my life twice. Once in the diner and once when you came to my office." David's voice was soft, sincere. "I was dying in that glass tower and I didn't even know it." "We saved each other," Rachel corrected. "This place, what we're doing here, I never could have imagined it before." Later that evening, after the center closed and Lily was asleep, Rachel and David sat on her apartment steps, watching the sunset paint the sky in gentle colors. The reporters were long gone, the headlines forgotten, leaving just two people who'd found something precious in an unexpected place. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't worked that night?" David asked. Rachel considered the question. "I think we would have found each other somehow. People who need the same kind of healing, they find their way together." David nodded, understanding that their connection wasn't about gratitude or guilt, but about recognizing loneliness in another person and choosing to do something about it. "My mother used to say that angels come disguised as ordinary people doing ordinary things with extraordinary hearts." "Smart woman," Rachel said. "She would have loved this place. Loved you." As stars appeared in the darkening sky, Rachel felt the deep satisfaction of a life that had found its purpose. And David felt something he'd never expected, peace that didn't depend on achievements or acquisitions, but on the simple joy of being known and valued for who he was, not what he owned. If you enjoyed this story of unexpected friendship and second chances, please remember to like this video, share your thoughts in the comments about kindness in your own life, and subscribe to Whisper Fable for more heartwarming stories. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Sometimes the most beautiful changes come from the simplest acts of caring.